You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos-Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Christopher Zehnder. Today we discuss the day after the November 3rd election. This regular panel, also known as the Irregulars, will consider a number of questions, and some of them are personal, some of them are practical, and some of them are theological and philosophical. Remember, gentle listeners, we're all of us card-carrying members of the American Solidarity Party. That is, we would be if the party had a budget for such things. We begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. I think, starting from the heart of the heartland, we should imagine that somebody is asking Mario Ramos-Reyes, who did he vote for? President, vice president? And he should tell us the truth. What? He ran out of the room. He doesn't want to respond.
I'm sorry. I was... good morning.
You're voting again. You know you voted early. Now you're voting again.
No. As you already said, as a current member of the American Solidarity Party, I think the American Solidarity Party got at least 2 votes from my household. And so for president, vice president. As I mentioned, I think before, that the third-party candidate got at least those who wrote in 5,000 votes. And I think this is a good number compared to what was got 4 years ago. There is another third candidate, the Libertarian candidate, who got more votes, almost 28,000. So, but at least we are already in the map and people know more or less who we are. And I think that's a very good news, and we have a lot of work to do from now into the future. But I think as a beginning, I think was great.
And just to follow up on that, and then Christopher Zehnder will have to put his cards on the table. Why did your whole household vote for what some call the wave of the future, and we know to be already the rivulet of the present? Why did you vote the way you did? I mean, people told you, no doubt, that you were throwing your vote away.
Well, the issue is that I had been formed by the tradition of what we may call in general term personalism. So the center of my view is the human person. And the human person realized herself into what we call the common good, from which you can draw many principles: solidarity, subsidiarity, and principles of that nature. And the party which represent much, much better those principles, that tradition, is the American Solidarity Party. From there are a few, or more than a few, public policies proposed by the platform of the party, which I fully endorse. Not the most important one, of course, is that it's a party which support policies based in the whole range of life, defends human life, the human dignity. And I think that's key. And also that way of understanding politics is quite different from the duopoly to which we are accustomed to. And I think many young people, that is why I think I'm very optimistic about the future, many young people are looking for something different that can break from this competition, if you will, confrontation, which is almost exclusive based on money and power.
Those are central, absolutely central considerations. Well, why not shift from Kansas to Ohio, the home state of Christopher Zehnder, and suppose there's a post-election survey and the knocker comes to knock on your door and says, "Who did you vote for?" What would you say?
Tell you how big his Trump button was. I might suffer physical harm.
You don't want to be thumped by Trump.
Where I live in rural Ohio is very strongly pro-Trump. I told you before the show that some houses had multiple Trump signs on their front lawns. So there was a few Biden signs, but mostly all Trump. No, I had discussions about this very thing on Facebook before the election, because I was urging some people to consider the American Solidarity Party. And one of the people I was discussing with, the fellow, he said, "Listen," he said, the election is so close. Trump is, basically more or less pro-life. You can't vote third party this election. I told him, I said, well, by that argument, no one can ever vote third party at any time, because we're always facing Armageddon in the current election. And I said, maybe that's true. Maybe it's true that things are getting worse and worse every single election. Maybe our choices are getting worse. Maybe the dangers are greater. I said, but that strikes me as suggesting that the strategy used by the people who stand up for right principles, for the sanctity of human life, etc., that our strategy is all wrong, because that shows we're losing. If it's getting worse and worse, and there's greater and greater danger, the other side is getting stronger, and we're getting weaker. So at a certain point, you have to say to yourself, we've got to stop doing things as they've normally been done. And I personally, I'm not one of those who thinks that you could never vote for the lesser of two evils. I would never. I think there are circumstances where that might be incumbent upon somebody. I don't think we're in those times, and primarily for this reason. I think what those of us who believe in the sanctity of human life, especially Catholics who should be upholding Catholic social teaching, what we've done is we've allied ourselves for decades now with one party, many of whose positions are opposed to some central positions in Catholic social teaching. I'm not just talking about the death penalty. I'm talking about economics and a proper understanding of justice and war, etc. We've allied ourselves with that group, and to the degree we allied ourselves with that, we've tied ourselves to it. And now we're tying ourselves to, I think, a very questionable man in the White House, that's to put it mildly. And if he sinks, we sink. And I've tried to tell people that. In order to uphold what we want to uphold and promote what we want to promote, at a certain point we're going to have to say we have to strike off and do something different. We have to rediscover what it is, all the principles and all the conclusions that are central to what we believe, and promote those, and challenge both sides in a prophetic way. But the only way we can do that is by separating ourselves, and that's primarily the reason why I did what I did. The questionable thing I did in voting for Brian Carroll for president. I didn't do it, by the way, because I think he would win. But
well, again, that's from my perspective a compelling set of reasons. My wife and I also voted for Brian Carroll and Amar Patel. And if asked why, I guess my starter answer would be, I don't think any of us ought to support or give support to somebody who fails to meet a necessary condition for winning support. Neither Biden nor Trump passed the necessary condition test. Biden manifestly fails to do so with regard to the sanctity of life, the integrity of marriage, and I think Trump manifestly fails to do so with regard to what people sometimes call civic friendship, having a due regard for the value of other people in terms of their shared search for the common good. It strikes me that he's an American strongman wannabe, and perhaps the most charitable thing to be said for him is that he's a dangerous clown. Now, that eliminates the major contenders, and I want to say again, as I said often as not on this program, that perhaps the greatest and most deep-seated threat to peace, to world peace, is the restockpiling, the rearmament of our country and others as well of nuclear weapons. And any society that says that if it is threatened, yes, it will do everything it can to destroy its attackers. shows a profound disregard for the value of life. And I think that since the end of World War II, that's been the position of the United States, and I think it's had a corrosive effect on our moral character, which is not to say that it's not the same for our international enemies. So by process of elimination, we eliminate the major parties. And to cite a close associate, to wit, my wife, she said this morning, how stupid can the American people be that they would divide themselves among two such repulsive candidates? Now, that's the negative side of my approach. Positive side is we want to build something that's good. Instead of choosing between the lesser of two evils, we want to build something that's good, that's creative. And if we're going to be in the permanent minority, so be it. No one ever promised us that we would win, and I don't think any of us thought that we would win. I don't think any of us think in the party that will win in the foreseeable future. But we've established, as Mario put it, we've established a presence, and we need to make ourselves more present. Well,
yes.
Yes.
May I say something about that? I think that, at least to my eye, I think is key. What I feel is perhaps is a sentiment coming from many young people, mainly, but also not so young, is that there is a need for a movement who function, I'm going to use this word, as a witness of something that is completely missing from the political landscape, a prophetic voice, if you could call that way, that announce a new way of understanding politics. So the question is, I think, in front of many people, what really is politics? Because when you hear people speaking, it has a negative connotation, and it shouldn't be that way. Well, it does, because people only see interest groups, confrontation, conflict, and searching for power. And so when you see a movement which is witnessing a different way of understanding community and raising the question about what really means to be human, what really means to be a human person, I think this is a sign that something good is coming out of that movement. And in other words, we have, I think, the mission to renovate even the language for politics, such as bring it back the, I think, more nuanced or more profound idea of the common good. And also something which is, I think, is pervasive in the culture, I think, which is what does really freedom mean? It seems that the only freedom that you can get around you is negative freedom. It seems that the idea that we need to start building or educating ourselves in something more, in an obligation, come from certain values, from justice, etc., is completely missing. We use this word just a mere word. So going back to my original point, I think our mission now, I think, is very crucial. Perhaps at this moment may be more educational. But when the people start losing the memory of certain things, then get into what is practical, what is politics, raising money is advertising deceive people, and so on. And so then the whole thing continued. And there should be, and I think I hope is the mission of American Solidarity Party, is begin reflecting about the fundamental things that we need to know and then create in order to propose something meaningful to the American people.
Yes, indeed.
And I think, if I may add to that, I think one of the things we have to really concentrate on is we have to enunciate right principles. I think that's extremely important. We also have to pay attention to what feeds the belly, because when people are worried, for instance, about their livelihood and their lives and their poverty, they often don't think about the higher things, right? And they're easily swayed by demagogues. So one of the things I really think was characteristic of both sides in this election was a tendency to divide and conquer, to set people against each other. On the Democrat side, it tended to be based on racial and sexual lines. On the Trump side, it was racial too, to a certain extent, but it was sometimes national, and it was so both sides are basically separating people who actually should be united together in a common cause. Black, like with economic justice, blacks and whites should be, and Hispanics and everybody else should be joined together because it concerns all of us, and that's the sense of the common good. That's a practical application of the common good. We can point to the principle of the common good, but at the same time, we can show how it should work. And probably the only one who, in this entire election cycle, who got a glimpse of that, at least at first, was Bernie Sanders. Was problematic in many ways, but I think he did see, at least on the level of the working class, that it was important to kind of ignore the racial divide and to primarily address the problems that confront everybody, from white rural people in Ohio to people in Detroit, inner city people in Detroit. I think that could be something that could really capture the imagination of people.
Once upon a time, there were discussions about the Catholic vote and who will win the Catholic vote or what happened to the Catholic vote. And, of course, the American Solidarity Party is most definitely not a Catholic party, but we in the party have a good many Catholics, and so from a party perspective, the question of the Catholic vote is a significant question. And let me ask Mario, who probably dealt with this question more on a visible level in Latin America. Is there such a thing as a Catholic vote anywhere in the United States or Latin America? If there is, how does it vote? If there's no such thing as a Catholic vote, why isn't there such a thing?
It's a very good question. I have been thinking about that for many years. Let's put in this way, as I understood it. If the reality of politics is being played into the political arena inside communities, communities are historical creatures. We are movement into the real world. Where things move are confusing, etc. So if those communities are the ones which are what we call, or I think sociologists call, the subject of politics, this community must follow certain principles. Now, those principles may come from what this community really believes. If this community, let's say, for the sake of an example, is a union or is a workers' movement, that worker movement, which is in struggle in real life, may follow certain principles. Those principles may come from an ideology or may come from the Catholic tradition, the Catholic social teaching. Now, the question is whether or not that movement can only and exclusively carry out the principle of Catholic social teaching. Is that possible in real life? My answer, looking at the data, is no. That was an attempt that was made by certain movement, the Christian Democratic Party. In other words, it's a movement of people who are following certain desires and obeying, almost in some instances, historical moment, Catholic social principles. Now, in doing that, sooner or later they start mixing other principles which would be coming from different sources. So to say that what they voted obey exclusively to Catholic social principle, that is not exactly what happened. Now, if you look at as a desire to have the Catholic vote as a bloc, well, that was an attempt. You can find, again, going back to certain eras, 1960s in Chile, for instance, because the other alternative was completely the opposite. But when you look at other countries, the so-called Catholic vote was spread out among the population. And some people who were Catholic were militant or some more nationalistic or nationalist political movements. Some other were less so. So that's my assessment. In other words, when I hear the word Catholic vote, in my heart sounds a little bit clericalism. So because in reality it was not the case. Now, the project may be ideal, but I'm not sure really that really worked. Now, if we understand differently this term, Catholic vote, in the sense that anyone who is a militant of a political movement, even that this political movement is exclusively Catholic, and still that person informs his conscience in those principles, that may be another way of defining it. So I would begin the reflection about this with background.
Yes, all right. Thank you. And Christopher, what's your sense of these questions?
Well, I guess existentially, I don't know if there's a Catholic vote in the United States anymore. And in part, that's because I'm not sure there's even a common Catholic conception on the level of believers, that is, materially, you might say. There's a formal, there's a Catholic conception, but a common conception even what it means to be Catholic. You know, if the past 50 years have been rather devastating, all throughout the church in terms of apprehension of orthodoxy and even an apprehension of what the nature of the church is. So Catholics, what we've tended to do is we've just followed the primary forces in society. So that's why you have a large number of Democrats Catholics voting Democratic, a large number of Catholics voting Republican, and aligning themselves, not just for practical purposes, not just strategically, but ideologically. And so we don't actually hold principles, common principles, Catholic principles, which should guide us in our voting. So I think the Catholic vote is just dispersed amongst the different sections of society. On the other level, I would think what a Catholic vote would be a vote informed by the social teaching of the Church, and that's a mode of proceeding based on principle, right? You begin with, you have common principles. Application of those principles would very likely differ. So even if we had, say, a Catholic society and a Catholic society guided by Catholic principles, it wouldn't necessarily be the case we would have no parties. You would still have people who would disagree based upon how to implement certain goals, how to achieve them, and but the thing about, I think ultimately the thing about the Catholic principles, the Catholic social teaching, they're not revealed in the sense that they're not inaccessible by nature, by natural reasoning, and so those principles, I think, are the human principle, the principles of human society as such. That's, in other words, the principles in when God created man that He wanted human societies to live by. So that in that sense, you might, I don't like to use the term secular, but the Catholic principles, the Catholic idea of society and how to order society is going to be one that is rooted in natural reason and temporal in the proper sense of that term.
But may I interject something there that can somehow feed our conversation? The question, I think, or the concern that I have about talking about principles and the application of principles is that most Catholics that I know of, at least, do not know much about those principles. In other words, just for an example, when there was a mandate in our state about wearing the mask because there were some evidences coming from the scientific community that may prevent the spread of the virus. People rebel, and I'm talking about just Catholics. So the camps were divided into those who were seeing that as an imposition from the state, and the other, which is a very individualistic reaction, is those who say, well, yes, because the state knows what it's doing, whatever that means. But then when you bring into the discussion the idea of the common good, how the common good as a principle can play out, showing the need for wearing this particular device in this particular context where we are a community. In my life depend on your life, and we are united here in a good which is common to all. It's not just my good, it's the common good. When you start reflecting about that, and I did, and I sent letters, and you see pastors not even know really what you are talking about, so they are completely foreign to this, even that language. You say here, how then in the future you can talk about Catholic vote when people don't have even the memory of what those principles really are all about? I think that's a question, and I think that's perhaps what I want to say with the mission of American Solidarity Party. It's an educational mission. It's we have here a principle which, yes, we may say, well, coming from the Catholic tradition, but it can be very humane and way of understanding things in the society as a whole. I think that's something that we need to consider.
In this process of education, Catholics certainly look to the bishops as the chief teachers, by no means the only teachers, but certainly the leadership of teachers. And I want to put forward a very recent article coming from, what could I call it, a sharp source, a contentious source, but an interesting course. Hilaire Belloc famously said, read all of the things that you can read, and that's the best way to come to form an opinion. This is from The College Fix. The College Fix. It's student-reported and more than happy to engage in controversy. However, this particular article that I just came across is very apropos to thinking about the Catholic vote, Catholic institutions, and the leadership of the bishops. So it's not that long. And let me read it to you. The headline is, Catholic University faculty upset that school criticized gay marriage. I don't think this would have ever happened at my alma mater, that is to say that the school would criticize gay marriage. However, this is Assumption University, Catholic college in Massachusetts, and it has some distinguished faculty there. So I'll read it as it stands. Professors and students at Assumption University, a Catholic college in Massachusetts, are upset at the institution for sharing a document on voting that criticized gay marriage. University officials had emailed out a document from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Again, I don't think that would happen where I taught. University officials had emailed out a document from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops on October 19th to current students. It discussed various political issues and how voters, particularly Catholics, should weigh the issues while voting. The USCCB, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, represents Catholic bishops in the United States. The school had mailed out the 53-page document, this is coming from the USCCB, that touched on a variety of issues. The document, titled Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, discussed, quote, intrinsic evils, including, quote, promotion of racism and, quote, support for legal abortion, as well as, quote, redefining marriage. Reaction. Well, nearly 4,000 people signed a Change.org petition criticizing the university for sharing the document. Additionally, 80 current and retired professors signed a letter to Assumption's administration that shared similar concerns, according to the Telegram and Gazette, a local paper. Now, here's the wording, or part of the wording, from the Change.org petition. Similarly, human cloning, destructive research on the petition criticized, the Change.org petition criticized, I want to make this clear. The bishops were writing now, so what I'm going to say now is what the bishops were writing. Similarly, human cloning, destructive research on human embryos, and other acts that directly violate the sanctity and dignity of human life, including genocide, torture, and the targeting of non-combatants in acts of terror or war, can never be justified, nor can violations of human dignity, such as acts of racism, treating workers as mere means to an end, deliberately subjecting workers to subhuman living conditions, treating the poor as disposable, or redefining marriage to deny its essential meaning, ever be justified. Close quote from the bishops. Now, the petition said, using the term redefining marriage is an obvious jab at non-heterosexual individuals. It is in the same sentence as other very pressing, harmful issues in society, as if it is being compared as something just as damaging to society as those other issues, the petition said. The petition said that the school could have caused a trauma with its statements. The faculty letter called for more resources and policy changes. Changes included asking students for their pronouns and chosen name at registration, and making this information available on faculty class rosters. Other resources could include faculty development program and inclusive teaching practices, dedication of more bathrooms on campus as gender neutral, and hiring of support staff with expertise in the specific challenges facing LGBTQIA+ students. Now, a reply from the administration. The university's provost and vice president of academic affairs responded, "The teachings of the Catholic Church are open to academic debate, but the fact that Assumption is a Catholic institution is not. We should not, cannot, and will not apologize for campus ministry sharing the teachings of the Catholic Church as articulated in an official document issued by the Catholic bishops." What about that?
Christopher?
Oh, I thought you were going to. In part, yeah. I mean, the university is right. The key is, of course, is always to try to couch what the church teaches in principles of natural morality. To think that the nature of the family is not important to the common good is mind-boggling, because, I mean, unless you think that society is just made up of individuals who define themselves based on whatever criteria. But if you think that the family is actually the very basis, as they call the cell of society, we have to get that right before we get society right. So, the college, I mean, I'm not sure about the statement that the teachers of the church are open to academic debate in a Catholic institution. They're open to academic exploration in a Catholic institution. But if it's a Catholic institution, it begins with the assumption that the church has authority to teach her, and that, at least in many cases, the church's teaching is right. So it should be more a faith-seeking understanding rather than academic exercise trying to discern the truth of the matter in the sense of, whether it's right or wrong.
Mario.
I have, yes. I think that here the whole thing provoked us to start thinking about what is the situation. What does this reading indicate, if anything? And I think it indicates something that Benedict XVI said many years ago, which is educational emergency. We are into what he called educational emergency. Now, I think he indicated that what we are missing here is that we learn, we absorb, we embrace, we assume those quote-unquote Catholic principles in a process. So there should be a method by which we embrace them. The method is not exclusively intellectual. The method comes from a slow process of being informed by them. Now, if that is the case, perhaps for me or for anyone, I think for me, cannot talk about other people. I did not learn those principles by being taught by someone, rather by being loved by someone first. In other words, there is a slow process by which human beings begin relating to one another. In other words, if you already are an intellectual whose principle is completely the opposite to those ones, it's very hard for them to be persuaded the other way. In other words, we are missing that the beginning of the transformations, if you will, begin, let's say, at home. And so, if that is the case, I think talking about, well, we are going to evangelize the university is an illusion. It won't happen because that is too late. And so we need to begin to repropose hypothesis, which is a Christian hypothesis. It begins from what is immediate to us, admiration, affection, and then move into a justification, rationalization, which comes a little bit later. And I think that is the proposal, and I will say this clearly by many personalists, even though that term make some people feel squirmish, to say the least. But I think if we don't discover this, that our society is moving into the first level of materialism, and we need to move beyond that because we are human person. But we don't move beyond if somebody else is there to listen to us, and that begins with the family, to treat us as a person, and then move to the great ideals, and then ultimately to God, etc., etc. If we don't begin with that, expect that an institution which is far beyond that transforms society, that's an illusion. Now, what I'm saying is that the process by which we can recreate or create a culture which is the culture of the human person will take time, of course. And I think we need to think about that. The educational emergency doesn't mean trust in institutions which are already there, and they are already holding different views. We need to come and before that begin forming those institutions. I think I'm right now reading a book, which is a very compelling book. Unfortunately, it's only in Spanish. It's from a Spanish sociologist who used to be very close, not only close, to the group ETA, which was a terrorist group in Spain, and he came a long way to discover what a human being, a human person is. And his journey is described as toward a culture of encounter. And he's very, very detailed how he go about and slowly, step by step, began discovering by himself when he meet people and families who move him. And ultimately he said, well, my intellectual claim changed. It's not I change my intellectual claim in order to change my life. It's the other way around. And so I think we need to start thinking about that because there's no quick fix here. It's a long range, and we may not be even here on this earth when that happens if that something is fixed.
Let me pick up on a number of strands of our conversation. Certainly the common good question, certainly the application of principles question, and certainly the role of reason in everything, and then the cultural context in which we reason. And I want to pick up on that by reading an often cited passage from St. Thomas Aquinas. He writes in the first part of the second part, question 94, article 4, where's that? You wonder, right in the heart of his discussion of natural law. This is where that comes from. Quote, as to the proper conclusions of practical reason, by practical reason he means at least ethical reasoning, as to the proper conclusions of practical reason, neither is truth or rectitude the same for all, nor where it is the same, is it equally known by all. Thus, it is right and true for all to act according to reason, and from this principle it follows as a proper conclusion. There would be other conclusions as well. And from this principle it follows as a proper conclusion that goods entrusted to another should be returned to their owner. But then he observes that, quote, as we descend into further detail, and as the number of conditions increases, the greater the number of ways in which this principle may fail. Now, it seems to me that we descend into detail very often, and the number of conditions increases very often in the political sphere. For example, you could take the endless political debate about what counts as fair taxation, or you could take the very current debate about whether or not there ought to be some sort of compensation for people of color who have historically been dispossessed. Thoughts on this, gentlemen? I think we could say that Thomas Aquinas is our common mentor, and what he's saying is, you bet you've got to use practical reason. It's not just emoting, and there certainly is truth and rectitude, but it's not equally known, and it's not exactly the same for everyone. And so when you take a principle such as goods entrusted to another should be returned to their owner, well, yes, of course, but as we go into more and more detail and as the number of conditions, as the context complicates itself, you can go wrong in applying the principle. Christopher, let me begin with you. What do you make of this, and how does it apply to our current situation politically?
Well, I think, certainly I agree with it. But I maybe use an example of a principle which should be admitted by all Catholics, because it's been reiterated in Catholic social teaching multitudes of times: the principle of the right to a just wage. The question, so we can, first of all, amongst those to whom this principle is known, the question might arise: well, how do you assure a just wage? There are might be different means by which that would be done. Some might think like a minimum wage or a just wage legislation, where you just sort of impose a common wage everywhere, would be one means of doing so. But some might dispute, well, that it's not going to actually fulfill the purpose. It's going to lead to other ills. So they might propose other ways, such as, like the whole question of vertical syndicates that Pius XI brings up in Quadragesimo Anno. There might be 3 or 4 different ways or more to actually achieve a just wage. How do you determine what's the best way of doing it? Well, you have to take into consideration all sorts of things, not the least of which is the culture of the place in which you live. What might work in one place might not work in another, just because of the differences in culture and mindset. What can't be, there are certain things which seems like from the Catholic social teaching cannot be admitted, like if you follow Pius XI in Quadragesimo Anno, the whole notion that we just leave it up to what he calls the contention of forces in society, the kind of laissez-faire means of, and that will naturally bring about a certain result, a kind of economic anarchy. That seems clearly rejected by Pius XI. But other means there might be difference of opinion. So those things, you can agree on the principle of a just wage, but very easily disagree amongst yourselves as to what's the best way of achieving that. And that's, and too, like even the question we're discussing now about like the universities, we want to have Catholic institutions. And Mario, I think, is quite right. We have to start actually in terms. We want to spread Catholic understanding of the Catholic social teaching, for instance. Well, how do you do that? is simply writing treatises going to do it? Well, it might do it for some, and I think it's one of those things which we can't just hide the fact of what the church teaches and not try to explain it. But at the same time, we have to one of the means is to bring people into a community of mutual affection and love. How do you do that? Well, reforming the parishes, perhaps. Make those places for people who lack, the proper family foundations. They could be places that draw people in that way. Well, how do you do that? All these things, with practical reason, is a very murky thing. That's why I much prefer studying metaphysics than ethics. Metaphysics is much clearer than ethics. Give me a treatise on the Trinity over a treatise on law any day.
That's why so many people are so intensely interested in metaphysics today. They're taking the easy way out. That's
they
it.
They are,
right
yes, indeed.
Well, yeah.
Gentlemen, we're coming close to the end of the hour, and I want to have a contribution here from Archbishop Jose Gomez, who is the president of the Council of Bishops, if I could use that term loosely. And what I have in mind is something he said that has direct bearing on what both of you have been emphasizing. He writes, "Our mission as the Church and our duty as Catholics remains bigger than politics. We are here to serve God and bear witness to the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the coming of his kingdom. Most important of all, we need to be deliberate and vigilant about passing on this story, our Catholic way of life, to the younger generation." How could we do a better job of this? That's the question I pose. How could we do a better job? And have we even been vigilant in recent decades?
Well, and I think I would make a distinction, perhaps, in the statement when the Monsignor talked about the Church and our duty as a Catholic. I read that as a lay Catholic in my case, concrete, singular, which is part of a community, of course. And we can relate to what we said before about principles. When the principles get into the concrete, there is problematic because it may render a couple of solutions to the issue that are being held by Catholic and differ in the way that we deal with that particular principle. For some people will be flat taxes, for other people will be a different taxation. So that is part of our way to look reality and choose the same principle and apply differently. That somehow justify what I said before, that there is no such a thing as Catholic vote. The same principle apply with some uniformity into the real world. There are different ways of dealing with that. I'm not saying that everything is up for grabs and is very ample. No, there is a prudent way of applying that. And so what then in this story is our responsibility? Well, I see generally, at least in my case, commitment to education, but not education only in the intellectual sense, but also in the commitment, in the activist will. In other words, many people are looking at those who are older, so to speak, but not only what we say, but we do. In that sense, we are not just a person who flourish within a home rather than a community. So in that sense, it's our commitment with the community, with our neighbor, with the solidarity, with how we deal with the stranger. So there is a variety of ways where we are writing our story. And I think that, to me, I think is the way to deal with that. And be vigilant about ourselves, how we really are in this commitment.
All right, gentlemen, we're at the end of the hour, and one thing to note is that in this hour, looking at the election returns coming county by county, nothing has changed. Biden still has 238 electoral votes, Trump 213 electoral votes. There are 4 states leaning towards Trump, and there are 4 states leaning towards Biden. So yesterday might have been election day, but today's counting the votes day, and it might be much the same for the next few days. So that's it on the immediate front. Now, on the eternal front, the good news, the eternally good news of the gospel. The gospel for today challenges us. It's from Luke. Great crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and addressed them. If anyone wants to come to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Which of you, wishing to construct a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there is enough for its completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlookers should laugh at him and say, "This one begins to build, but did not have the resources to finish." Or what king marching into battle would not first sit down and decide whether 10,000 troops, with 10,000 troops he can successfully oppose another king advancing upon him with 20,000 troops? But if not, while he is still far away, he will send a delegation to ask for peace terms. In the same way, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.